We're learning as we have been for the last while, and Be'ezus Hashem, this will very, very soon not be necessary, but for the schus of a refuah shlema kreva for Rav Yosef Shlema ben Risha, and we are also asking for refuah shlema ukreva for Rav Shalom Doivber ben Chava, the father of one of our dear classmates. They should both have refuah shlema. Also delighted to announce a bumper crop of simchas this morning. Vivi Derin had a new great-grandson, Dave Ber Hakayin Derin. Goldie Baumgarten's son, Zelig, got engaged to Batsheva Smoller. Mazel Tov, Binyan Adead. It's the bar mitzvah of Shlomi Lavkovsky. Forgive me, I don't know what his mother's name is. But Mazel Tov, tremendous nachas, and the bar mitzvah of the grandson of Daniela Schneer Zalman Leber, who was born on Yutes Kislev. So Mazel Tov to everyone, and we have a correspondent at the bris of Dave Berhakay and Darren, our very own classmate Jane Marcus. So she's representing us all. Mazel Tov. And we should only be able to share simchas with happy hearts and in good health. Vayeshev is our sicha today. Aleph. B'negei l'mechirasoi shel Yosef al yedei echav be'esrim kesef. Regarding the fact that Yosef was sold by his brothers for 20 silver coins, Isa b'Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi teaches, Lefi shemakru b'chayr shel Rachel be'esrim kesef, yeh kol echad ve'echad poides b'noi b'chayr be'esrim kesef, shehin chamesh shkolim. The Gemara teaches that because the firstborn of Rachel was sold for 20 silver, therefore each and every Jew will have to redeem his firstborn son for 20 silver, which amounts to 5 shkolim. Then the Gemara continues, Lefi shemakru b'chayr shel Rachel be'esrim kesef, because the firstborn of Rachel was sold for 20 silver, v'nafal l'chol echad ve'echad mehem tiba, and each one of those who sold him made a tiba, and a tiba is a Talmudic term, which is synonymous with 2 silver, which adds up to a half a shekel. Lefichach, therefore, yiyah kol echad ve'echad noisein shikloi tiba. Therefore, each Jew would have to give their tiba, which amounts to a half shekel. V'hainu, and this means, shemipa'as ha'maisa de bechiras Yosef, because of the event surrounding the sale of Yosef, nischayvu b'nei Yisrael beveiz minei tashlumin. So Bnei Yisrael became obligated in 2 types of debts that they have to repay. Pidyon bechor u'machatzis hashekel. The fact that the firstborn has to be redeemed, and the fact that Jews would be, let's just say, in some way taxed for a half shekel, which was later used for karbanos tzibor, for the communal sacrifices. The kasvu meforshim bebir hashayches beinehem. And the Mefarshim explain the connection between these 2 things. And the Nezer HaKadosh says the follows. Machatzis HaShekel hikoifer nafshoy shel adam. When a Jew gave the half shekel, this was kind of like an atonement for his soul. It was a ransom for his soul. Val pi hayedua, and it is known, shemachmas ha'avoin de mechiras Yosef, that because of the sin of selling Yosef, nigzar oynesh hagolus l'dayres, the punishment of golus was decreed upon us for generations. Nimtza, that means, literally it means we find, this means, shemechiras Yosef hi chet nimshach, asher darish kapar l'dayres. It means that this is an ongoing sin which necessitates an ongoing atonement, an ongoing ransom. And so it's really simple to understand how this correlates with the half shekel. Vahatam de pidyon haben. Okay, so that makes, we understand. But what's the connection between the sale of Yosef HaTzadik, the sale of Rachel's Bechor, and pidyon haben? So the Torah says, "V'yarek Hashem kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim." Hashem killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt. Al kain ani zaveach laHashem goimer, and therefore the Jew has to bring a sacrifice of the firstborn animals. V'chol bechor banai efta, and the firstborn of my children I have to redeem. So how is this kosher reserve? How is it connected to Mechiras of Yosef? Because shemitzad Bechiras Yosef, Bechor Shel Yisrael, nichnesu gam Bechor Yisrael bechlal sakana. It was because of the fact that the brothers of Yosef sold him that Bnei Yisrael became vulnerable and became endangered in this plague. It's only that Hashem performed a miracle that although they became vulnerable to be stricken by this plague, but they were not stricken, and therefore we owe Hashem our firstborns, and therefore there's a pidyon haben. In other words, the question is, Bnei Yisrael were not stricken with the other plagues. So why should they be stricken with this plague? But this sin of selling Yosef HaTzadik made them vulnerable to this particular plague, but Hashem made a ness and they were spared. Okay, so what the Rebbe did in Sif Aleph is explain the Yerushalmi base. I'm sorry, so the Rebbe has a question. V'tzarech lahavin. We have to understand. Madua goram ha'avoin de mechiras Yosef shebnei Yisrael yischayvu al kach beveis sugei tashlumin. What is so singular about this sin that Bnei Yisrael should owe Hashem, as it were? They should enter into an obligation of having to pay back Hashem in these two ways. What is it about this sin? Base, oid kasha, and another thing that's difficult. B'Yerushalmi niskorim beis in yonei hatashlum. The Rebbe says, I have another question, and that is that in the Yerushalmi, there's an elongated discussion about the whole idea of the machatzis hashekel. That's what's under study. That's the context. That's the frame. Why Jews have to give a machatzis hashekel. And inter alia is embedded this idea about the pidyon haben. And here the Rebbe brings down what it says in Yerushalmi about machatzis hashekel. Lefi shechatu b'machatzis hayom yitnu machatzis hashekel. The first reason is because Bnei Yisrael sinned with the golden calf, with the cheta egel, and that happened after the first half of the day. You can look into Rashi on the word boishesh, bashesh. It was after half a day, machatzis hayom. Therefore, they have to bring a machatzis hashekel. And lefi she'avru al aseres hadibros, asara geira. A machatzis hashekel equals asara geira, so that's 10 geira. And when they did the cheta egel, they trespassed the 10 dibros. Lefi shemachru b'chayr shel Rachel poides b'noi b'chayr. Lefi shemachru b'chayr shel Rachel yeh kol echad ve'echad noisin shiklei tiba machatzis hashekel. And then is the part of the Yerushalmi that the Rebbe had already introduced to us in Seif Aleph at the very beginning, and then comes the idea that you have to be Paides Benoy, you have to do a pidyon haben because Rachel's firstborn was sold, and then comes the idea that you have to give a half a shekel because Rachel's firstborn was sold. So the Rebbe says, "Ulechaira eina muvan." Seemingly, it's not understood. My boy hacha. Why is this included? This idea of pidyon haben bisugya de machatzis hashekel in this discussion about the half shekel. inyan zeh, the fisha machru b'chayre shel Rachel, poides b'noi b'chayre. It's a list of reasons for why you give the machatzis hashekel, and then comes this limud, this teaching about pidyon haben. How does this belong in this part of the Gemara? Va'odzos, and even more. Yerushalmi, in that sugya, in that section of the Gemara, makdim inyan zeh de pidyon b'char le'inyan de cholechet ve'echad noiset shikla tiba machatzis hashekel. And even more curious is the fact that this idea of the pidyon haben that is connected to the selling of Rachel's firstborn precedes the inyan of machatzis hashekel that is connected to the sale of Rachel's firstborn. So it almost seems like an interruption. There's a whole list of reasons for why Jews give a machatzis hashekel, and then there's the idea of pidyon haben, and then it goes back to say, and this is also another reason for machatzis hashekel. So the Rebbe says, so based on the order of how the Gemara presents this to us, we must say, she'ein elu beis inyonim nifradim, that the two things that Jews have to pay back, as it were, because of the sale of Yosef, that they have to be poides b'noi b'chor, that you have to do a pidyon haben, and that you have to give a machatzis hashekel. It must be that these two things are not two separate things, but they're intertwined, they're connected to each other. And to understand how the sale of Yosef is a reason for the Jews having to give a machatzis hashekel, you first have to know that the sale of Yosef is the reason for the pidyon haben. In other words, not that it's an interruption and not that it's out of context, but that it is crucial to understand how the sale of Yosef serves as yet another reason for having to give it machatzis hashekel. In order to understand that, you have to understand that it is that sin that serves as the reason for pidyon haben. Hello, Seif Gimel. Gam tzarich lahavin. We also have to understand, Aleph, bishleima zeh shemachas hashekel inishal tashlumin al chet chamor mechiras Yosef harei zeh muvan. Lefi shebekasav mudga shehi kofer nafshay. It's one thing we understand. It's self-understood. The machatzis hashekel, which the Torah calls kofer nafshay, an atonement or a ransom for the soul. We understand how this is payback for the very serious sin of selling Yosef HaTzadik. Abel pidyon bechor l'ch'era adraba yesh kan initial toiv v'kedusha. But seemingly, the whole idea of the pidyon haben seems to be on the contrary. It seems to be something good. It seems to be that there is a special holiness that is being attributed to this first son. Like the Torah says, Kadesh li kol bechor, sanctify for me each firstborn. Hainusha bechor nifta mitzad hakdusha sheyesh bai, which implies that the bechor is being ransomed or redeemed because of his extra holiness. Ve'im kein, and if so, ech yitachen shemechiras bechor shel Rachel he shehivia le'inyan hakashrim kadesh likol bechor. So how could this terrible sin of selling Yosef HaTzadik serve as the reason for pidyon haben, which is a way of sanctifying the firstborn? It would seem that a more exalted level for the firstborn would have its antecedents in something positive and not something negative like this sin. Base. And another question. So the Gemara says that the machatzis hashekel is given because it adds up to a tiba. A tiba adds up to 2 silvers, and so that means that Yosef was sold for 20 silver. That means that it was divided in 10, and each one of the Shvatim got a tenth. They got 2 they got 2 silver, which adds up to a tiba, or a half a shekel. Hukshu mefarshim. So the mefarshim ask on this, seemingly only 9 of Yosef's brothers participated in his sale. Because Binyamin was too young, he wasn't even on the scene. And the Torah tells us very outright that Reuven was not there. Rashi tells us that he was off crying and doing teshuvah. Ein hamisbar oila lecheshba de machatzis hashekel shehi asiris de esrim kesef. So something is not computing here, because the machatzis hashekel would be 1/10 of the 20 silver for which they sold Yosef. 20 divided by 10, and we have only 9 people participating in the sale. The tirtzu beveizafanim. And this was explained by the Mefarshim in 2 different ways. Aleph, Gam Reuven Nimna, that Reuven is also counted into the 10. The Afal Gav de Reuven Lehaya Az Imahem, even though Reuven was not present at the moment that Yosef was born, Mikol Makom Henichu Chelkai, but they left him his portion. They still allotted him a tiba. They allotted him a chatzi shekel, 2 silver. Why? Because they surmised, they believed that he was not going to protest this plan. And this especially aligns with what we're taught in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, that after they told Reuven that what they did with Yosef, Shama Reuven heard Vishasak, and he was silent. So according to one Mefarish, it was divided in 10 equal parts, and even though Reuven was not present, they gave him his part. Or the second way to understand this is Yosef ba'atzmai nimna ki'ilu haya loy chelek b'mechirasai. That Yosef himself was counted as if he took part in his sale. Lefi shahu haya hagoyrem lemechira al yidei akina shebetchila, because he was the one that caused the whole sale through the jealousy that he instigated through the way he acted with his brothers. But the Rebbe says, but this doesn't compute. It's not so simple to understand it this way. Everything in Torah is exact. The kevon shamachira bepoel nasa rak al yedei tisha me'acha Yosef, and because practically speaking, the sale was effectuated only through the brothers of Yosef, 9 people. It was not what Reuven had wanted. And for sure, it wasn't that Yosef was like, ooh, please sell me. Lama lanu lahachshiv hashayches harachoyka hanal Reuven or Yosef al hamachira kishtatfus shavim shar tesa'achim. So why should we reckon? Why should we even consider these far-fetched ideas as they're being completely in alignment with selling him, and they had an equal part? Either Yosef had an equal part with the 9 brothers, or Reuven had an equal part with his 9 brothers. Ad kedei chalukas ha'esrim kesef la'asara chalakim shavim. So much so that what they get for selling Yosef is divided in 10 equal parts. How does this, how did this compute with the Shuti Shel Mikra, with the simple understanding? Dalit. So you know what, should we review the questions? We'll go very quickly review the questions. First of all, why does this sin cause 2 necessary paybacks on the part of Bnei Yisrael, the half a shekel and the pidyon haben? Then we have to understand what the whole inyan of pidyon haben is doing in this Yerushalmi to begin with, because it's a whole list of reasons for why Jews have to give a machatzis a shekel. And then we find that for one of the reasons, this is also the reason for Pidyon Haben. And the Rebbe says that given the order of how the Yerushalmi does this, it puts the Pidyon Haben and attributes that to the sale of Yosef, and then says that that's also a reason of Machzah Shekel. We must conclude that it's only by understanding how a Pidyon Haben is tashlumin, is payback to God for selling Yosef, that we'll understand how Machatzis HaShekel is payback for selling Yosef. Then the Rebbe says, this is in Seif Gimel, that we understand why the Machatzis HaShekel would be an atonement. It says in the Torah that the Machatzis HaShekel is koifer nafshay. It's an atonement. It's a ransom for the soul. We got it. It's easy. But we don't understand how this is connected to the idea of Pidyon Haben, because about Pidyon Haben, it says, Kadesh li kol bechar, sanctify for me every firstborn. Seemingly, it's a positive thing. This child has certain stature. Why would this positive status be precipitated by a sin? The second question that the Rebbe asks is the last question that we were considering, which is that the Gemara says that each one, that the 20 silver that Yosef HaTzadik was sold for was divided in 10. Each one of the Shvatim got 2 silver, which equals a tibba, which equals a half shekel. But something still needs to be explained, which is, why was it divided in 10 when only 9 of the brothers sold Yosef? Mefarshim say either that you count Yosef in the 10 or you count Reuven, neither of which is an intuitive way to understand the story. And therefore, the Rebbe says we have to understand what's going on here. Those were the questions. Seif Dalet. This is like Exhibit A of how the Rebbe takes a Gemara and just illuminates it and gives us like a whole different way of understanding Mechiras Yosef. It's amazing. Hachiluk bepashtos ben beis eifane hatashlim al Mechiras Yosef Pidyon Haben and Machatzah Shekel hu. Simply speaking, the difference between these two kind of paybacks that we owe Hashem, the Pidyon Haben and the half shekel, is B'Pidyon Haben schum hatashlim hu lefi erko shel Yosef al pi mechir mechirasei hu chamesh shkolim. In a Pidyon Haben, you give 5 silver coins. They equal the 20 silver that Yosef was sold for. It's very neat. It's very aligned. Masha ein came, but Machatzah Shekel, in contradistinction, when you talk about the Machatzah Shekel, hatashlim hu lefi haschum shehigia liyodei shekol echad me'ach Yosef ben hamechira Machatzah Shekel. The Machatzah Shekel equals what each one of the brothers made on this sale of selling their brother. So it's understood from this, Shabeis hatashlumin hein keneged beis pratim nifradim b'mechiras Yosef, that these 2 things that we owe Hashem, these 2 things that we have to pay back, they actually parallel 2 different aspects of the sale. Machatzis HaShekel hi koifer nefesh ha'pegam shepala ha'mechira b'shvatim mitzad ha'na'asam mechiras Yosef. The fact that we have to give a half a shekel as a ransom for our soul is atonement for the deficiency and the flaw that was effectuated by the sale in the shvatim themselves, in the fact that they benefited from the sale. And I asked a few people exactly what the Rebbe is referring to here in the benefit, because it seems to me it's not like that they made the whole 2 silver on this. It's not that of an astronomical gain, but it seems it's the fact that they could assuage their consciousness from having killed him, and by selling him, they could feel a little bit better about it. And that's basically what the Torah tells us. So that's one thing. And then there's the second aspect. And then there's how Yosef was affected by the sale. He was sold as a servant. And for this, yesh liftois es haben habachar. To address what happened to Yosef, we have to ransom the firstborn. We have to redeem the firstborn. And once we understand these two dimensions, we can address the question spoken of above in Seif Gimel, איך ייתכן שמכירת יוסף בחרא של רחל גרמה את העניין למעליוסה דפדיון בכור אצל בני ישראל. How is it possible that a seemingly negative, terrible, actually terrible deed, brothers should sell a brother? And how do they know what these Ishmaelite, this caravan of Ishmaelite whatever sellers are going to do to him, right? So they effectively killed him for all that they know. How does that give rise to something so positive? The inyan of Pidyon Ben. And the Rebbe explains, because although when you're addressing the brothers, this was definitely a sin. This was definitely a Yerida. This was definitely a descent. Hine be Yosef atzmoi. But when you speak about Yosef himself, Ha'al hadavar ilui habali de bitur be'inyan habachar. But for Yosef, this effectuated an ascent. And this is expressed in the inyan of Bechira. How so? Seif Hey. When it comes to the sale of Yosef, the Zohar explains, Gorim kuchabrichu kol da begin lekaima gezerah de gozar bein apsarim. Hashem caused all of this to happen because he wanted to lekayim, to observe the gezerah that had been, the edict that had been put on Bnei Yisrael in the Bris Bein Hapsarim, in the covenant of the pieces with Avram Avinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu garam lekach she'achei Yosef yimcheruhu. Hashem caused that Yosef's brothers should sell him. Kedei she'tiskayim gezeras Bris Bein Hapsarim shebnei Yisrael yordu l'galus Mitzrayim. In order that what Hashem had told Avram Avinu, that your children will be strangers in a strange land, in order that this should come about, Hashem caused that Yosef's brothers should sell him. And the Zohar explains there, Shatam hadavar shehutzrach Yosef leirid leMitzrayim al yidei she'echav machruhu. Yosef HaTzadik could have been abducted by other people. Yosef HaTzadik could have come down to Mitzrayim in so many ways. Habei drachim l'makim. Hashem has so many ways in which something could happen. But in such a pernicious way that his own brothers should sell him? Why? Why should it happen this way? Seemingly, seemingly, Yosef HaTzadik could have gone down of his own volition, he could have been brought down, he could have been dragged down, but in any which way, that his brothers should not have a hand in this. And yet that's what happened. And the Zohar explains something amazing. Why did it have to happen this way? Because Yaakov Avinu's brothers, through this action, manifested their sovereignty over Yosef HaTzadik. By throwing him into the pit and selling him, they manifested that they are ka'adain hamoicheres avdoi. They are like a master that sells his servant. V'terem yarad Mitzrayim, v'nase Yosef eved shel echav. So before Yosef went down to Mitzrayim, he became the servant of his brothers. How does this help? Pa'al hadavar, this caused Sheba Asid Be'ez Yiridas Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim, that in the future, when Bnei Yisrael would go down to Mitzrayim, Loi Haisel Mitzrayim Shlita Malei al Bnei Yisrael K'may al Shara Avdeim Shaloi Hayu Eved Yochel Livroich Min Mitzrayim. So because the brothers threw Yosef in the pit and they sold him, so they became his sovereign. Then when they came down, they never became enslaved completely to Mitzrayim because everybody in Mitzrayim was subservient to Yosef, and Yosef was subservient to them. And therefore, they were not like everybody else in Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim was a place that no slave had ever been able to escape. Mitzrayim had impervious borders. And yet Bnei Yisrael left, b'yad rama, they left publicly, va'adraba. And on the contrary, not only that, Kevon shahamitzrim nasu abdei Yosef, v'Yosef haya eved b'nei Yisrael, nimtza sheYisrael disholtu al kula. So what the Zohar is explaining is that because Mitzrayim were all subjugated to Yosef, and Yosef was a servant of Bnei Yisrael, in effect, this means that Bnei Yisrael were sovereign over all of Egypt. And so therefore, the Rebbe is uncovering for us a very positive aspect in the Mechira, not only explaining why it had to happen through the agency of the brothers, but also looping us back to that question of how could a pidyon haben, which is an elevation in stature, kadesh li kol b'chor, how can this be connected to a negative event? But now we see it's not a negative event. I don't even want to say entirely, because what the Rebbe covers here is that on Yosef's, the way it affected Yosef, there's no negativity. Vav. Mebir hazoyhar, from what the Zohar explains, miskabelas havana amuka Yosef b'hadgashas hakasuv oides inyan mechiras Yosef. From what the Zohar explains, we receive a deeper understanding of what the Torah underscores regarding the sale of Yosef. Shemibli habeit al hakavana haloytev shahisa la'acha Yosef bezel lefoel yatsa mikach tova. That notwithstanding the fact that the brothers had a not positive intention with selling him, but practically something very good came out of this. Like Yosef says, Lemichya shilachani goimer. Hashem sent me to give you sustenance. Losum lachem she'eres ba'aretz lahachayos lachem lefleita gedola. I was sent here in advance to prepare a place where you will be saved, where you will be saved, where you will be safe. Shaloizu b'vad she'hamechira hisa gram v'siba l'teitzah toiva avor b'nei Yisrael aydei zeh Yosef nasa achakach mishna l'melech. Not only was the sale something that caused positive outcomes for Bnei Yisrael through the fact that Yosef, after being sold, ended up being the viceroy, ela hamechira gufa nasna es hakoyach lasum lachem se'eres goimer lefleita gedola geulas Mitzrayim. But the sale itself created the possibility, seeded the possibility of redemption. The whole geula was made possible through this. V'nimtza shemechiras Yosef pala davar v'hifuchai. This means that the sale of Yosef was a paradox. It effectuated both a positive and a negative thing at the same thing. Mitzad ache Yosef shekavanasam b'mechira hisa sheyafoich le'eved gorma mechira legolas Mitzrayim. Because of the intention of Yosef's brothers, they sold him in order that he should become a servant. Yeah, this caused the golus. Umitzad zeh shegorim kuchabrichu kol da. But because Hashem caused all of this to happen, mitzad kavanas v'ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'zeh, from Hashem's perspective, from Hashem's intention, nasna hamechira al yidei ache Yosef es hakoyach ligeula. The fact that Yosef was sold by his brothers was the energy for the geula. And now we're in a position to understand the connection between the Bechor of Rachel being sold and the concept and the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. Me'achar shemechiras Yosef pa'ala sheyeh Yosef kanui el hashvatim. Because when they sold Yosef, through selling Yosef, Yosef became sold to the Shvatim. He became their property. And the Shvatim were mechuyev in mitzvahs, they were mechuyev in milah, and they had a tie to the Holy Land. And therefore, ein lemitzrayim yecholes lishleit alav. And therefore, Mitzrayim was never able to be sovereign over Yosef, never able to really affect Yosef, as it were. And so, in effect, through this, because Yosef was the viceroy, and Yosef remained hovering above the constraints, the spiritual constraints of Mitzrayim, therefore, in effect, all of Bnei Yisrael remained above. And this aligns with the whole idea of what is a Bechor. Sha'Bechor kanoi laHashem. A Bechor is sold to Hashem. Lihu. Hashem says the Bechor becomes mine. Mesiras reishis pirya l'rshus bayrei. And giving the first of our crops, of our produce, into Hashem's ownership, as it were. All of this, maskira la'adam b'loshen hachinuch ki hakol shaloi. All of these mitzvahs remind a person that everything belongs to Hashem. Shekol ma shebershus ha'adam l'Hashem hu. That anything that we seemingly, allegedly have ownership over, it all belongs to Hashem. Si'if Zayin. Al pizeh yuvan, and through this we'll understand Mashediku Chazal binagel lekapara amchiras Yosef. We'll now understand what the Chachamenu Zechanim Levracha, the Chazal, specified about the kapara for the sale of Yosef. Shebemechira hishtatfu asara me'acha Yosef. Afal pisha Reuven pshita Yosef lo hiskim mechira. So now the Rebbe wants to circle back to what Chazal say, that 10 brothers were involved in the sale, when seemingly, al pi pshat, Reuven was nowhere to be found. And for sure, Yosef, saying that Yosef participated in his sale is a little bit of a stretch. But the Rebbe says, no. Now, based on what the Zohar explained, we understand what's going on here. Ki kedei shemechiras Yosef tuchal lifal as inyan hatoiv ha'ilui digeula shelo yuchlu hamitzrim lishleit olav nidrash koyach shel tzibor dafka. Because in order for the sale of Yosef to be able to put into effect something good, the idea of Geula, the exaltedness of Geula, that Mitzrayim should not be able to be sovereign over the Jews, it was necessary to have specifically Dafka, a tzibor. And a tzibor is comprised of 10. And here the Rebbe says, when 10 Jews sit together, or find themselves together, Azai Shchinta Sharia. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says the Shechina rests upon this assembly. Sheira or elaki shalamayla meha oilam. There resides on this assembly a celestial light that is higher than the world, that transcends the world. And now look into the parentheses here. We have an oblique reference to something we all reference constantly. Va'afilu mimlochim. The Rebbe says that when 10 Jews are together, there's a transcendent light that's even higher than the angels. And if you look at the footnote, Igeres HaKodesh, the Rebbe is saying this, referencing this idea of Malach Mechol, that even Malach Mechol can't accomplish what 10 Jews can accomplish when they're together. V'lachein, Nimshach mizeh hakoyach lihishaer l'mayla mimitzrayim, l'mayla min hamitrim, hamitzorim, v'hagvulim v'hagalos. And so because there was a minyan, there flowed from that holy assembly the power to remain above Mitzrayim, above the constraints and the parameters of Golus. V'yesh loymar, we might say, shemitam zeh, for this reason, kasher garim kuchabrichu kol da, when Hashem caused all this to happen, loy haya dai betisha sheyim chiruhu. It wasn't enough that only 9 should tell him. It was necessary for there to be 10. Al yidei tziruf asiri, by joining to the 9, the 10th, whether it was Reuven or Yosef, as stated above. But for the very same reason that you needed a minyan, for that very same reason, you needed that begolui and a revealed level, only 9 should take part in this. Because if all 10 brothers would have actually come together to do this in a revealed manner, then you would have seen in a very revealed way that the Shekhinah is residing on this group. And because of the holiness of the assembly, it would not have been possible for Yosef to be sold. So there had to be 10, but there had to be 10 in an obscured fashion. In order for Yosef to be sold as a slave, at least on the external level, only 9 brothers took part in this. But on the other hand, but because in a hidden fashion there were 10 who took part in this, Paul hadavar shebepnimius uba'amitius nishar Yosef al yodei kol bnei Yisrael lamayla mishlitas Mitzrayim. This effectuated that bepnimius uba'amitius on the at the truth level, at the most core level, Yosef remained, and because of Yosef, all of Bnei Israel remained higher and transcending the sovereignty of Egypt. Seif Ches. Al pizeh yumtak masha hakofer nefesh al mechiras Yosef hu machatzis hashekel. And now yumtak means it will be sweetened. It will be better explained. We will understand why this kofer nefesh, this idea of atonement for Yosef HaTzadik's sale, comes dafka through a half shekel, machatzis hashekel. Especially because we now learned that this could have been referred to as a tiba. This could be referred to as in different ways. It could be referred to as 2 silver. Shtei kesef. Why machatzis hashekel? And what happened from the machatzis hashekel? Shemimenu lo niknu karbonos yachid, ki im karbonos tzibor. There were never personal karbonos that were bought from this fund. The machatzis hashekel fueled the communal sacrifices. Hakapara al mechiras Yosef nifeles al yedei gilui ha'inyan hapnimi de mechiras Yosef koyach hatzibor shenimshach b'mechira v'shehichnis baz ha'ilui de geula hefach inyan ha'abdus v'hagolus. The kapara for the mechira is effectuated through revealing the inner core of what happened when Yosef was sold, which is the strength of the tzibor that flowed from the brothers coming together to sell him, which actually put into place the geula. And geula is, of course, the opposite of subjugation. V'zehu echad inyanim hanirmazim b'shem machatzis hashekel v'lo eser gera k'yetze b'zeh. And this is one of the things that is alluded to in the name machatzis hashekel, a half a shekel, when I said earlier that same amount of money could be referred to in different ways. Shahayachid mavin. This is to teach us. Every individual has to understand. When you're yourself, when you're alone, when you're a yachid, you're only a half of something. Shekel sholem, and in order to become a something, to become a whole shekel, as it were, you must unite with somebody else. The herger zeh de machatzis hashekel, hamevi letziruf v'chibur ba'achdus Yisrael ba'abas Yisrael, and this feeling of halfness, I don't think that's a word, but this feeling that we are machatzis, this brings to us joining together, binding together. It brings to unity of Yisrael. It brings to love of Yisrael. And this is mitaken es ha'avoin de mechiras Yosef. This rectifies the sin of the sale of Yosef. Shesi basar ha'isa hefach ha'ava vayisnu'u eisei. Because the whole, on the pshat level, the reason for his sale was because they hated him, the opposite of love. ומזה מובן הטעם שעניין זה שמכירת יוסף גורמה לפדיון הבן מובא בירושלמי כהקדמה לעניינה של מכירת יוסף כסיבה לתשלום מחצית השקל. And now the Rebbe is answering the last question that he asked, which is why in the Gemara is this reason for giving a maxatzis hashekel preceded by the link between the mechira of Yosef and pidyon haben. Bichlal, what's it doing there? It's a conversation about machatzis hashekel. And not only it's there, but it precedes another reason for machatzis hashekel. But the Rebbe says, but now we understand. Why? Shekain hagdama shemechiras b'chayr shel Rachel Paula ta'inin de b'char Esel b'nei Yisrael, because the idea that selling Rachel's b'char caused the whole idea of b'char by b'nei Yisrael, ma'isifa havana be'inyan hasheni. This linkage between the sale of Yosef and the pidyon haben adds to and amplifies our understanding of what the Gemara says next, which is shemachatz hashekel shemimenu niknu karbanei sibor mitakenes es ha'inyan de mechiras Yosef. That the whole idea of the machatz hashekel redresses and fixes what happened through the sale of Yosef. Now, if this wasn't amazing enough, from now till the end of the Sikha, the Rebbe kind of unfurled a lesson for us that we know the Rebbe operated this way, but to see how the Rebbe brings it out from here. Kiniskar le'il Sif Gimel. Rebbe says, as was mentioned above in Seif Gimel, yesh beis oifanim becheshbon aseres ha'achim shenotlu chelek b'mchiras Yosef. There's two ways to coming to the sum of 10 brothers having taken part in the sale. Either b'tziruf Reuven, mitzazeh sheshama v'shatak, or b'tziruf shel Yosef lefi shehu garam lemchira. Either you say that Reuven was part of this, because when he found out what they did, he didn't go on a rampage, he didn't berate them, he didn't reprimand them, he was quiet. So either we add him to the sum of 10 brothers, or we say that Yosef was part of the 10 brothers because through his actions, he caused their jealousy, which precipitated his sale. Valpia now, and then based on what we learned in Seif Zayin, that the reason that they were involved in the sale and why Hashem didn't make this happen through the agency of any other people or circumstance is because they had to form a tzibor, And Garma Lashchinta Shaya Be'inyan, and this caused the Shechina to be there, and this seeded the possibility for Geula from Mitzrayim, and so on and so forth. Nimtzanu Lamedim Mibeis Hadeyas Hanal Hayra Nifla'a Begoydel Inin Avas Yisrael. We learned from these two modalities, either how Reuven acted or how Yosef acted. We learn a wondrous hayra in Abbas Yisrael. From the first explanation, which is that Reuven took part in the sale, under Lamedim. Before I say this in English, I want to say, I know this is going to be very counterintuitive, so wait till the end of the next paragraph. Okay, but in this paragraph, the Rebbe says, well, wait till the end of the next two paragraphs. In this paragraph, the Rebbe says, we learn from Reuven's participation that even when you're talking about Jews whose behavior is not the way it should be, you shouldn't separate from them. On the contrary, you should unite with them. Reuven beferish lo yiskim lanagasam shel echav. Reuven most certainly was not on the same page with how his brothers were acting. Right? You remember? He was the one that talked them down from the ledge of killing Yosef. And his whole plan was that he was going to come back and he was going to take Yosef back to his father. So he wasn't part of their posse. He wanted only to save Yosef and to bring him back to his father. And even though this was the truth, but after they did what they did, he didn't separate from them. He listened and he was silent. And afterwards, they are all in. They're all part of the same thing. And so this is a lesson. This is from Tanya. That when you're talking about your friend, and the only positive thing you could say about them is that they're created by God. And as far as the eye can tell, meaning as far as how they represent, they are far from the Torah. They are far from serving Hashem. First of all, there has to be loving them. And you shouldn't give up on them, and you should not forsake them. And you should look for the right way, for the efficacious way to bring them closer to Torah. Chani's asking, didn't the brothers curse anybody who would say anything about it? Why would he talk under this pressure? I mean, the answer would be that he would take a curse rather than take part in the murder of his brother. Reuven was a tzaddik. I mean, maybe that could be one answer. But the Rebbe is saying, it was la'achar ha'maisa. It was already, they did it. So now he had to think, what's the best way that he can remain in a position where he could have a positive influence on them. I mean, this reminds me of the story, and I don't remember all the details, but roughly, Rabbi Shmuel I think was in Yechidus with the Rebbe, and there was a guy in London who had spoken out against, I believe, one of the Miftza'im. And Rabbi Shmuel in his head started to think, I'm going to have to go back to London and give this guy a piece of my mind. And the Rebbe said, do not. And the Rebbe read his mind and said, don't talk to him about it. So then he was thinking he'll get somebody else to talk about this Inyan. And the Rebbe again read his mind and said, and don't ask anybody else to talk to this man. Don't talk about it. Talk about the rest of the 612 things, the 612 mitzvahs that we can agree on. This man was agitated. He was speaking publicly against one of the inyanim that the Rebbe wanted. The Rebbe said, speak about other things. So that's the Hira from Reuven. The Chidush Gadol od Yoser min Abir Hasheni. But there's even a bigger novel teaching to derive from the second opinion, which is that Yosef was part of the minyan. Afilum Adam Zeh Shalafanav Tzir Oisei. Ad kedei tsar gadol k'moi zeh shesaval Yosef mimchirasei al yedei echav. Even when somebody really caused you great harm and great agony like Yosef suffered by being sold, hine gam elav tzarich liyos hergesh shel avas Yisrael. Even to this kind of person, you still have to feel avas Yisrael. Not only should you not have grudges in your heart after whatever they did to you, elagam b'shas maisa gufa, but even while they are causing you to suffer, they're torturing you. Isa b'mishnah, we learn, it says in the Mishnah, that they done as kol ha'adam l'kafschus. You have to judge every person in a meritorious way. V'yasera mizu, v'veishval ruach b'fnei kol ha'adam, and even more, you need to be humble before every person. Upshite shelo yivrach mimenu, and for sure, it's simple that you shouldn't run away from this person. V'yazvenu l'nafshay, and forsake him. Al derech masha Yosef nimna bein hamishtatfim b'mechira, like we learn from Yosef, who is counted as taking part in his own sale. Ubefrat, and especially kashay yizbainin b'bira bein razakim b'tanya, when you will contemplate what the Alter Rebbe teaches in Tanya, Shekol Dover Hu Bashgacha Pratis, that everything that happens is Bashgacha Pratis, divine providence. V'afal pi shazulus hu bal bechira, and even though the other person has choice, they have choice about what they're doing to you or what they're doing to anyone else. And yes, he is deserving of punishment for doing something wrong, for committing a crime. But the Alter Rebbe explains, but vis-a-vis the person that was harmed, that harm was already decreed upon them from heaven. So yes, the pickpocketer has to be punished. But the fact that this person was going to lose $100, that was already decreed upon them. V'nimtza, so that means shahanizak hu ha'asham ha'amiti behezek shahala oilaloi. It means that the one who is harmed, it's actually his fault that the other one harmed him. Al derech sheyosef haya hagoyin l'mechiraseh l'mefarshim hanal. In a line with what the Mefarshim teach, that Yosef was the one that was the cause of his sale. It was his fault. It's a lot. It's like, okay, so it was a Gezer min hashamayim that you should lose $100. You caused this person to pickpocket you on the train. The part that I don't understand is you could have lost $100 by, I don't know, pulling a tissue out of your pocket and you forgot to put the $100 bill in the wallet and you lost $100. Or you could have gotten a ticket, or you could have gotten something for which insurance, asks you to pay $100 copay or whatever. Chalila. Anyway, the Yetzer al Kain, and even more, we know that everything that Hashem does is for the good. Maybe that's the answer. That in this hezek, in this particular hezek, there's a good thing that is coming to you. Like the Zohar teaches, that the sale of Yosef was what put into place the possibility of Geula. And therefore, al hazulas. And therefore, you can't get angry at this person who did this to you. By the contrary, by acting with this person with Abbas Yisrael, it weakens, it even obviates this harm. Al derech mashin is bar leil shal idei zeh sheyosef ishtatev b'mashvatim nimshach elav hakoyach l'cheiros, like was explained above, that through Yosef participating with the brothers, what flowed to him was the energy for redemption. Al idei zeh shenirba ba'avas Yisrael, and through this that we will do more in Abbas Yisrael, ad la'ofen de Abbas Chinam, till we come to a place where we give people love and good things for free, for no particular reason. Yivatel hadavar esibas hagolos sinas chinam. This will dismantle, will obviate the reason for the golos, which is hatred for no reason. The takef yuvatal b'derech memela hamesuvav hagolos atzma. So once we take away the reason for the golos, which is sinas chinam, then the result of sinas chinam, the golos, will go bye-bye. Ubelashon harambam, and in the terminology of the Rambam, umiyad hein negolim, immediately Bnei Yisrael are revealed, are redeemed. B'vias Mashiach tzidkenu b'mheira v'yameinu mamash, with the coming of the righteous Mashiach, speedily in our days, mamash, in actuality, not in some transcendent way, but actually.
Can I make a public service announcement? So first of all, we're so looking forward to seeing everyone on Shabbos. I know a lot of people on the chat are coming. I know not everybody, so we'll miss you guys that can't. But a lot of phone calls and planning, and a lot of time has been put to make it a really nice program. So that's first of all. And second of all, there is a campaign for Chabad of Binghamton, for Rivky's Chabad House, and our class has a team, which is really cool. So we get to like show our own space. I asked permission, very begrudgingly was given a minute to talk, so I'm gonna make it really quick. Last year, our team did very, very well, and I actually didn't even remember until I looked at the numbers, but we raised over $4,000, which gets matched by a donor, so it came to like $8,500. So I think it would be amazing if we could do that again, or even surpass that. I will post the link in the chat, and it's just a nice way to be able to show our love in a consolidated way, that it comes as a team, that it comes as our class. So that's my public service announcement. And thank you so much for the sikha. The only one thought I want to share on the sikha is maybe that philosophy only works after the fact, that like after something happens to me, that's when I think I deserved it. But going into it, I'm not saying it doesn't, like maybe just psychologically going into it, of course you could lose your $100 in a much more pleasant way. But after this happened to me, that's okay.
Or maybe like the Rebbe says in the next paragraph,
Right.
the good that has to comes from losing it in that particular way and not in some other particular way.
Meaning, yeah, that's where I thought of that when I heard the next paragraph, like after the fact, like to console yourself.
Yeah. Hannah's asking, so does the idea of victimization actually exist? I would factor out children who can't defend themselves. Our world talks a lot about victimization now, yes. And if you're not a victim, then you're the oppressor. And because Jews don't do victimization as a rule, Israel doesn't do victimization. Like Iran sends a few hundred missiles, and the next day everybody gets up and goes to school and goes to work and makes a joke about how everybody's jet lagged because they were up all night. And that's it. And we dust ourselves off. And so therefore, ergo, in this crazy, hopefully leaving us woke ideology, we're the oppressors if we're not the oppressed. But we know, I mean, mitzad, everything that we learn, everything that we know, we can't be victims. We can't be victims because we are the children of Hashem, and everything that Hashem does is for the good, and everything is bashkacha pratis. And there's so many sichos